Hey, good evening, Lockport Township High School District 205, parents, guardians, community members, citizens. Just want you to hear a voice as you jump on this live stream. We've got about 3 minutes to our airtime. We always know that friends come in at 7:01, 7:02, but do want you to know that you are live for Making Sense of the Dollars, the Lockport Township High School District 205 Central Referendum. So we will be jumping on with you soon enough, but just wanted to let you know that we're here and you are in the right place.
What is the referendum? Shall the Board of Education of Lockport Township High School District Number 205, Will County, Illinois, alter, repair, renovate, equip, and improve the site of Lockport Township High School Central Campus, including preserving and protecting the exterior of the building, Veterans Foyer, and the main gym, replacing and improving HVAC and major mechanical systems, renovating and updating instructional areas and classrooms, and improving accessibility to comply with the Americans with Disability Act, and issuing bonds of said school district to the amount of $85 million for the purpose of paying the cost thereof. The referendum is not asking to build a new school. The referendum is asking to renovate and repair the school we have.
Good evening, Lockport Township High School District 205, parents, guardians, community members, citizens, interested parties of all type. Tonight, you have joined an online community conversation so that you can kind of come into this space here in the Porter Room and do it at your convenience that we're calling Making Sense of the Dollars. My name is Dr. Bob McBride, Superintendent of Lockport Township High School District 205, And on behalf of our Board of Education, thank you for joining us. You're devoting the most precious thing you have, your time, to this conversation. As we get started, I want to deal with some logistics with you first. And I want to give you an idea of who is here in Studio Porter Room with us. You've obviously have me here at the podium, but we're going to pan over and you see Mrs. Stephanie Croy. She's our Director of Business Services. Janine Wheeler, our Acting Director of Public Relations. And really, they're going to be the heart of tonight's conversation as well as your questions. You see Dr. Lori Cristofero, Dr. John Greenan, Dr. Carrie Green, Mrs. Angela Adolph. They could give a wave, almost like a telethon, except for they're not taking pledges tonight. They will be monitoring our YouTube channel as you put questions in there. So what we would invite you to do is you'll see that our comments are open. And if you could put your questions there, we will do the best job we can trying to keep up. Sometimes we understand that you might ask the same question in slightly a different way than someone else, but we will absolutely try to honor those questions. And all of this is being recorded, and we'll use this as part of the information that we share. So if we don't answer your question tonight, we will certainly answer it at some point. I'd also say those YouTube comments are open. We're a school. You know, we still believe in the idea that we should be kind to each other, respectful. We should treat each other with the dignity and the courtesy that we all would want. So I would invite you to exhibit that. One of the things I've learned as an educator is the students are and the children are they're always watching. And if you could think about that tonight as you put your comments down, especially in terms of how you treat each other. This is really important as a community when we have an important conversation like this. This is different than the last time we did an online community conversation. In that last online community conversation, which you can find archived on our website, on our YouTube channel, we introduced the concept behind this Lockport Central referendum. We shared about the 4 years worth of homework that I think you would expect from the Board of Education before coming into something like this, most intense in the past 2 years. I shared with you some important principles that our board arrived at. They feel that preservation of a historic building that's been meaningful for the entire 65 square miles of our high school district has meaning. They also believe that renovation is less costly than new construction. Our community has 6 times rejected new construction. We heard you and wanted to offer the community something new and as thoughtful as possible. We understand economic times, and tonight is really about the finances of any referendum. We know that economic times are difficult, and we understand that new construction would be the most challenging financial burden we could ask for the community. Finally, unity. When we came to an analysis of past referendums, one of the disunity elements in those past referendums were the perception of attendance areas. And some neighborhoods get a new building, other neighborhoods don't. And that really pitted neighbor against neighbor. We know that Central is centrally located in our 65 square mile high school district. Every single porter who would come through our school, starting as freshmen, would be able to experience an improved building that has major mechanicals that will lead it into 30, 50 years more of life, and modernized classrooms that are appropriate for the 7 feeder districts that feed into us in an education here in 2023 and beyond. Preservation, renovation, and unity. We talked about that, and that's not really what we're talking about this evening. We're getting down to dollars and cents. In a moment, you'll see a graphic in front of you, and I want to walk through that graphic. And you might know that in many ways, when we started with DLA Architects, we started with a renovation that could cost as high as $115 million. Our board went down with DLA to $95 million. Finally went down to $85 million as they considered the impact on you community members. What got cut off of those conceptual plans? There was a plan when DLA looked at $115 million, when they were doing workshops and brainstorming with students, staff, community members, to have a huge atrium that would start in the cafeteria at Central, would demolish the auditorium, would really open up the whole southeast side of the building, create a whole new entrance, a lot of steel and glass. That very expensive atrium just didn't make it to the final plan. We reviewed plans to close over the entire courtyard area at Central, right in the middle. Very expensive to put a new architectural roof and then fill in that entire area with new classrooms and new spaces. That ended up on the cutting room floor. What really came down to is what you're seeing now. Major infrastructure, and you're only seeing on this graphic about $26 million worth of the major infrastructure needs. Systems that have come to the end of their life, 70-year-old boilers, for example, that have come really to the end of their normal and their natural life. And major classroom remodeling, which involves reclaiming spaces that are no longer being used for their original purpose, our pool, athletic locker rooms, other spaces that we could expand into and provide programmatic instructional space, but then general remodeling of places like our biology classrooms, which are fairly dated. You also see on this graphic a comparison that shows you new construction as compared to renovation. Cost estimate for a new central campus would be about between $145 million to $150 million. Cost estimate without a pool and an auditorium in that building would be about $130 million to $140. And then the cost estimate of a brand new high school on par with East Campus. What this referendum is proposing are infrastructure improvements, which you can see, and general classroom remodeling. Just those two bare concepts. So let's get into it. And ultimately, this is a financial proposition on the part of the board. The board is doing what you might have done in your own lives. I know I've done in my life. When I had to buy a home, I had to get a 30-year mortgage. I had to finance it over 30 years in order to afford that home, but I knew I could take on that debt. I've had home improvements that I just couldn't afford right away to pay for the entire amount, so I opened up a home equity loan. You might have done those as well. In terms of school finance, municipal bonds are that version of a home mortgage or a home equity loan. They would be bonds that we would sell, that we would pay off over 25 years, and we would take on new debt, annual payments, in order to make those payments. The payoff, we hope, would be to have a facility that provides a substantial improvement to our community, prevention as well, so that major systems do not fail. I want to turn it now over to our chief school official and director of business services, which is Stephanie Croy. I was thinking about a Mark Twain quote today when you meet Stephanie. Nothing spoils a good story like the arrival of an eyewitness. And I think you're going to find Mrs. Croy is the eyewitness to our finances every single day. She is the person who's looking at all of our line items, reporting out to everyone from the state to auditors to our board monthly. And all of her work is available and transparent online. She'll be interviewed and moderated by our acting director of public relations, Mrs. Janine Wheeler. Enjoy the conversation. We'll be coming around towards the second half of this hour for your questions and to answer them. So thank you for spending an hour with us.
Thank you, Dr. McBride, and thank you for everyone who's joining us tonight. We are going to start with a lot of questions that we've gotten when we've been out in the community with talking to people like you. And we thought the best way, we've tried to put a lot of these things on our website and our frequently asked questions, but since we have Stephanie Croy here tonight, we are going to jump right into it and ask some of the basics, but also some of the specific questions that you've had. We're going to start with, Stephanie, can you talk to us about what is a bond referendum?
Sure. Thank you. As Dr. McBride said, a bond referendum for a school district is similar to financing a large capital project for an individual, right? So at a really high level, it's essentially the school district asking taxpayers if the school can borrow money. And it has to be for a specific capital project. The reason we have to ask the taxpayers is because the taxpayers are the ones who help us pay it back. So at a really high level, that's what a bond referendum is. We're putting out there for the taxpayers, we need to do this big capital project and we need your help with that. So we're asking you for your help.
And for these sort of projects, is there any state funding or grants for construction?
Not currently, no. There's nothing currently available outside of bond funding.
Okay. And since we're talking about taxes, how much does the school rely on property taxes for its funding?
So this is a really good question. Almost 90% of the district's revenue, total revenue, is what we call local revenue. And so of that local revenue, the vast majority of that is our property taxes. There's tiny little pieces that are things like school fees. But the vast majority of it is property taxes, almost that whole 90%.
But you're not just talking about homeowners, right?
No, absolutely not. So property taxes are, every property in the district pays property taxes. So that's industrial owners, that's commercial properties, that's also residential properties. So all of the businesses in the district, as well as all of the residents in the district, pay property taxes. And it's all 65 square miles of the district that
Okay.
pays it. Mm-hmm.
All right. And the way it's structured, my understanding that it's because of the state of Illinois that the schools rely on property taxes.
Correct. So in any community, right, any society, all the public services need to be funded in some way. Illinois has chosen property taxes to be that source of funding for all of the public services, including public school districts. So that is the mechanism that public school districts have to collect money to pay for all the expenditures for the district, because that's how the state of Illinois has decided it would be funded.
All right. So since we're talking about property taxes, I thought the best way to get down to the brass tacks is to look at my tax bill because I live in the district. So Stephanie, let's talk about my property taxes.
Sure.
So we have here a number of the taxing bodies, and I bring this up because a lot of us, myself included, we might look at the number of what we owe, but we really don't scrutinize our tax bill, and I think this is a good time that we should really do that. So we see a number of taxing bodies on here, including our district, and one thing I've noticed is that the tax rates, what can you say about the tax rates?
So the tax rates generally, while property values go up, tax rates go down. So what you're going to see a number of things on the tax bill, right? So you're going to see the amount you owe, obviously. You're going to see all of the other public entities, all the public services that are putting out a levy or a request to the taxpayer for public funding, right? So forest preserve, road district, elementary school district, high school district, city of Lockport, et cetera, right? Library. So that's down the side to the left. What you're going to see up at the top on the right is a box that talks about your property, right? And the fair cash value of your property is there. So that fair cash value is based off of the value that the assessor says your property is worth. And that, along with the rates that the entities are, that each entity is asking for, those pieces are computing your tax bill. So the other thing that most of us probably skip over is the calculation to the right. So the fair cash value is, like I said, the value that the assessor says your property is worth, but then only a portion of that actually has taxes assessed on it. So if you look in the box below that to the right, it talks about the land value, the building value, and the total assessed value. That's approximately a third of that fair cash value. So property taxes are only paid on that third. So then that assessed value, you've got subtractions, potentially you could have exemptions. So there's a number of exemptions that homeowners can have can have or have applied to their assessed value. Generally, the homestead exemption, right? You own your home. If you own your home, that'll get subtracted, and that's $6,000 less that you have to pay, or less of a value that you have to pay taxes on. Senior citizens, there's a homeowner's exemption as well for senior citizens. So then that gets down to your total net value, which is applied to the total rate. So as those values go up, the tax rates generally go down. Because what happens is, while all these entities put out a levy or request for tax dollars to the taxpayers, it gets spread over the whole value. Like I said, for Lockport Township High School, it's 65 square miles, all those properties within that. And as new property is added to that pot, so to speak, of EAV or assessed value, then the portion we have to ask of each individual house or company reduces. So that's where that rate goes down as opposed to going up.
But as you said, the value is going up. When I looked at my assessed value over the last few years, since the last year, it was up almost $6,500. So on average, how much does that assessed value go up annually?
So over the last 5 years, it's gone up an average of about 5% per year. Depending on the year and within that 5-year range, one of the years was lower. It was one of the COVID years, 2021 tax year, 3% it went up that year. But in the last year or two, some of the townships saw as high as 9% increases in assessed value. So as that value of your house goes up, that is the biggest chunk it's the biggest reason why the tax dollars you owe, the bottom line on the tax bill, why that increases, it's because that value of your home keeps going up. And it's going up more than the requests from the property tax entities, right? So the taxing bodies.
Okay. And that said, the referendum would have an effect on one's taxes. So another thing we wanted to do is make sure people can see for themselves what that effect would be. So I want to show you on our website, we have a calculator, a tax calculator, that will give you a good idea for your own numbers. So if you take your own tax bill, and if you go to our website, LTHS.org, and you click on our referendum page, and you can scroll down here and see some of the things that we have. You go down to the middle of the page, we have our tax calculator. And if you click on that, you can see what Stephanie was talking about. If you go onto the upper right hand, there's a sample tax bill, what we were just looking at, my tax bill. And there you see the fair cash value. So make sure when you do this that you're not using like a real estate estimate, that you're actually using your own tax value. So if we click on what this is for my tax bill, it is $23,090. And if I update that, this shows, and as Stephanie said, I have a homestead exemption because this is where I live, and it would give me, let me see, if I did this correctly, it would give me, I didn't, I can't see it on my screen. It would give me, yes, sorry. All right. There we have $194.96 or $16.25 a month. And again, as Stephanie said, for older residents, like a senior citizen exemption, that would take it down below $15 a month. So again, we just want people to see this for themselves, and so they really know what they're looking at. So Stephanie, if the referendum were to pass, when would I see a change in my taxes?
So if the referendum passes, the district would issue bonds before the end of the calendar year 2024. So that means that the effect on selling those bonds in the 2024 calendar year will affect the 2024 tax levy. That means the bill that you will be paying in June and September of 2025 would be the bill you'd see the increase.
Okay, and how would that change over time? What would you expect over time?
Right, so the increase will, like I said, the increase will affect that 2024 levy. So you'd start paying it in 2025, and from there, once your taxes increase, once the tax rate increases for the district for these bonds, it kind of stays there over the life of the bonds, right? It'll slowly decrease as the bonds start getting paid off, little bit at a time, but it's scheduled out over the life of the bonds, which, similar to a home, is 25 years. By law, school districts can only sell bonds and pay them over either 20 or 25, and our school district has a waiver that we can issue them and spread them out over 25 years, which is better to taxpayers because it lowers the per year amount, for one, and number two, it also has more taxpayers pay that share because you may have new taxpayers moving in that last 5 years of the life of the bonds, and they are sharing in that payment back to for the bonds as well.
So it's like the difference if someone has a 15 or 30-year mortgage, say.
Correct.
Okay. Another question we get often is, what if the cost of the renovations exceeds $85 million?
That's a really good question. So I think it's going to depend on how much everything comes in at, because if it comes in significantly over 85 million and 85 million is all we have, there's going to have to, the district and the board are going to have to, really the board is going to have to decide which things they want done and which things they don't, right? We can't ask for more than what the ballot is asking for, it's just 85 million. If there's a small overage, say it's $1 million over, that might be able to be funded out of things from the district, right? The district does collect something called impact fees. So as new properties come in, new developers build homes in the district, each home, the developer, in order to build that home there, pays what we call impact fees to all of these taxing bodies, and they're intended to offset some of the increased costs for the school district, children coming from that home. So, when we collect those things, that particular revenue source has to be used for renovations, constructions. It's intended to help with building costs or project costs. This is something that we could use those revenues for.
Okay. Another question we commonly get is, what is the district's credit rating and how would that affect things?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. The district's credit rating, most recently we were rated by Moody's, and our rating is AA1. That is the second highest rating given by Moody's for bond ratings. Their top rating is AAA. That rating, Moody rates that or bases that on a whole number of different economic and financial data points. And in the rating process, they interviewed me. They looked at our finances. They looked at the economy around us to determine basically the district's ability to pay that money back.
All right, that's it. I want to turn now to, we had a board meeting. The last board meeting was Tuesday on the 20th. And there were a lot of things that came up about Central Campus. And one thing we discussed was the ceiling collapse, because I think a lot of people may not understand that the ceiling collapse is not what led the Board of Education to seek a renovation referendum. If anyone has been following the board meetings for like the last couple of years, it's been talked about. Maybe people got things in the mail about Central Campus. But this last board meeting on the 20th was very interesting because it was a report from WJE, which was the forensic engineer that discussed the ceiling collapse. And I would invite anyone interested in this, and it was very interesting, to go to our YouTube channel under live videos and see that, because it discussed why the ceiling collapsed with age and moisture because of the lack of climate control in there. So if you go to that video, it's at an hour, 25 minutes, I believe. But it's very interesting. But another question that came up is if our insurance would cover that.
I am not expecting the insurance to cover anything. So to do our due diligence, we did file a claim as soon as possible. On the second, I was filing a claim with our insurance company. However, what they were waiting on is this report from WJE. And I forwarded that, and I'm expecting that they will probably deny the claim because age is not a reason for an insurance claim, right? The age of the building, or the age of the building itself and the roofing system and the ceiling systems, none of that is, age is not a reason for a claim. Usually for an insurance claim, they're looking for an event to have happened, right? A storm, or some kind of, weather event that would cause that to collapse.
Right, and in this case, none of that.
None of that happened.
Right, and the roof was intact. It was really a matter of age, but again, I encourage anyone interested to watch that for themselves. Another thing that was discussed in the board, and this is another question we get quite a lot, is Stephanie gave us an overview of the very complicated school finances, but specifically the fund balance. Many people look at some of the documents we have online and wonder about the fund balance and why this money could not be used for this renovation. Could you please discuss that?
Sure, absolutely. So one of the things that probably the best document that shows the district's fund balances is something that's given to the board every month. It's our statement of position. It's in some ways similar to a balance sheet for a company, but in other ways it's different, right? It has something called fund balance on it. What is fund balance? So fund balance is, it's the accumulation of differences between revenues and expenses over time, right? Those differences occur for all kinds of reasons. But the biggest piece to know about fund balance is if you look at our statement of position, which I believe you have on your screen now, you will see a number of columns, right? So this is one of the biggest differences between corporate accounting, a company's accounting, or an individual's accounting, their balance sheet, versus what a school district or municipality, for example, would have in their balance sheet, statement of position. We have to report things in buckets, right? Those buckets are restricted or reserved, or there are a number of different words you can use to describe it, but basically what we're saying is the money that goes into that fund for that purpose has to be used for that purpose. And the reason is mainly because we are collecting taxes for those purposes. So our tax levy has all of these pieces: an educational piece, an operations and maintenance piece, a debt service piece, which is the bond levy repayment piece, transportation, municipal retirement, which is our Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund. It's all of our support staff. These are statutory things. They're legal things we have to pay for these employees. All of these columns are what we call funds. And we have to collect money and put it in those funds, and we have to spend it from those funds. So out of all of these funds, each of them has a purpose, right? So the largest one on the left is our educational fund. Our educational fund is exactly what it says it is. It is to fund all of the educational expenditures of the district. All of the people, supplies, purchase services, all of the things that make a school system happen, educating our students, they go in that fund. The operations and maintenance fund is for maintaining our buildings. And so all of our custodial maintenance grounds expenditures are there. And that's what has to be spent out of that fund. Light construction projects, right? So light repairs, light maintenance projects, smaller repair or equipment or minor renovation expenses can go in there. For example, dividing a classroom with a wall. That in theory could be in there because it's not a significant expense. Putting up drywall, right? The debt service fund is it takes in money to pay for our bonds. That's it. That's the sole purpose of that fund. Transportation pays for all of our transportation expenses, the bus drivers, the buses themselves, outplaced special education transportation. All those things have to go in that fund because we collect a portion of our tax levy for that purpose. Same thing with municipal and municipal retirement and Social Security, Medicare. We can't use those for anything other than those purposes. Capital projects is the fund that I referred to earlier. That would be when I spoke about impact fees. Impact fees, when we collect them, that's the fund that goes into. That is also the fund that we have to expend large projects out of. So when the portions of the East Campus roof were fixed not too long ago, when a few years back we did some structural work at Central Campus, all of those expenditures are bigger, right? So $100,000 or more projects. Usually they're bigger than that, but those projects have to be spent out of that capital projects fund. And impact fees are pretty much the only revenue that goes into that fund. That's the fund balance, which is approximately $1 million that we potentially could use if the $85 million project comes in at, say, $86 million. And then finally, the working cash fund. The working cash fund is essentially it's a fund to loan money to the other funds. So it's really not intended to spend. It's intended to keep on hand if, for example, the operations and maintenance fund gets too low, which it may over the next couple of months. Then what would happen is we would borrow money, the board would borrow money from the working cash fund and transfer it to the operations and maintenance fund on a temporary basis so that all of the bills can be paid from the operations and maintenance fund, payroll, et cetera, before we collect spring taxes.
All right.
Does that make sense?
Yes, so essentially, even though we have all of this in the fund balance, it's really not in a spendable form. We must maintain these balances. And Stephanie Croy has a lot of reports. The website contains a lot of reports. This specific report was, again, in the treasurer's report in the last board meeting. But again, just very quickly, I want to show you where on our website you can find some of these resources. So if you go to, on our website, the About Us, go to the departments and go to Business Services. This is where you will find all the information that the Business Services has. If you scroll down to the bottom of the screen, you will see the financial statements, the budgets, our truth and taxation, and also on the left column, and this is also under our quick links, is transparency. Transparency has a lot of information about our financials. If you scroll down to the bottom of that page, you will see that in last year and earlier that Stephanie made a video explaining the tax levy, because again, we all recognize that this can be very complicated, these financial issues with the school. And then also very quickly, if you go to About Us and go to our Board of Education, that is where you will see all the board meetings when they're scheduled. And if you go to Board Docs and click on Meetings, this is where you will find all of these reports, our maintenance reports, our treasurer's reports. Under the superintendent's reports, you find a lot of this information. But I just want to make sure you know where all these resources are. And from here, we are going to move into your questions that we have in the chat. So let's see what we have.
Hi, we are getting great questions over here. So this one, I think goes to Ms. Croy. If passed, if the referendum passes, will you take out the entire amount of funds needed at one time, or will you take it out over a few years? And if you do take it out over time, will that save money?
That's a good question. So actually, it's a question that I have spoken to our financial advisors about and posed that same question. What would be in the district's best interest, in the taxpayer's best interest, right? And the answer is it most likely in the best interest of everyone to issue them all at once. And here's a couple of reasons why. Number one, taxpayers would see an increase only once, right? If we did it over time, you'd see like this gradual increase, little bits at a time, which sounds like it'd be a good idea, but sometimes it's easier to just get the increase out of the way, right? One-time purchase. So that's one reason. But another reason would be that the timing of the expenses of the project are unknown, right? So that's a second reason, and to have the money on hand is important. And a third reason is what happens when a school district issues bonds. They will sell the bonds all at once and collect the funds, and then the money that the district is holding doesn't just sit in a checking account, right? It would be invested, and it would be scheduled out to allow for cash flow to come in throughout the project and then earn some income on that too. So that's another potential resource for if the project comes in over 85 million, is we get the funds, we invest it, and hopefully get a little bit of extra funding there.
At times when the interest rate is quite high right now.
Yes, that's another good reason. Yes, absolutely. Selling them now while interest rates are high would leave us the potential for the highest interest rates, because we can invest it and schedule it out. Yes.
There's a two-part question here. How much of the $85 million will go towards Central if the referendum is passed? And then why wasn't there more money spent on Central over the past years compared to East?
Those are good questions. So 100% of the 85 million will go to Central. And the reason for that is that's what the question is posed. So how the question is posed on the ballot, talking only about renovation to Central Campus, is exactly how the district has to spend it. We're basically, by posing that question and having taxpayers say yes or no to that question, if the taxpayers say yes, we're promising to spend it exactly how we asked you, right? So 100% of the 85 million would go to Central Campus, as well as the income potentially earned on the investment of those funds. So that's that question. The second question is a little more complicated because number one, Central Campus is a lot smaller than East Campus, right? So East Campus is 2.5 times larger. About 537,000 square feet is East Campus, and about 220 or so, that 220,000 square feet is Central Campus, right? So just by the nature of the building size, more money is going to be spent on East Campus than Central Campus in maintaining it.
And we have that graphic now.
Okay.
And as that graphic comes up, one way you can think about that, Mrs. Croy, is that since about 2018, we've spent about $1.20 per square foot on Central, $1.11 per square foot on East. Probably the most consequential thing as you look at this graphic is, why are we at a referendum? If you look at spending at East, those have been part of a roof, part of an auditorium, part of an HVAC system. Referendum requires that you have expenses that are high enough you have to get voter approval through financing. And when you're replacing full roof systems, full HVAC, full electrical systems, for example, that have lived their life, kind of coming back to the beginning of this, you've reached a part of your lifespan of those systems inside a structurally sound building that require voter approval. They're not replacing a window or two, not replacing a valve or three. They're removing 70-year-old boilers to replace them with something far more modern, far more efficient, far more cost-effective. So it's an entire system replacement. And that's really why we need to go to the voters in order to secure your permission, because that is the democratic system we have here in Illinois.
Next question.
So our next question is, if the referendum does not pass, will Central be at risk for closing?
Sounds like it might be a board decision question.
Well, it could be a
So
board
Dr.
decision, and I might want to handle that on two levels. Central is closed now. And I'd really ask the community to let that sink in just for a moment. If we take stock of our current situation, we had a report last week from structural engineers and forensic architects who shared that two factors contributed to a ceiling collapse, and we only had a ceiling collapse in one room, room 310. That was caused by two things: age and moisture in the building due to condensation buildup from a lack of climate control, modern HVAC. That caused that plaster ceiling system, after 90 years, to give way. All of the other ceilings that we'll replace, we're replacing as a precaution because they're a similar construction method. We'd hate to have children, staff, anyone in that building and not replace ceilings that are moderate to high risk. But it really points out what happens when whole systems age out and eventually will fail. So we are closed now, and we are in a situation where we're very graciously using a facility in Lincoln Way School District. What does that mean down the line if other major systems are not addressed? Electrical, HVAC, roof, structural. I think we have a perfect example right now of what can happen. What is happening is something that we have to take a look at. The hope is that in properly renovating the building, we make a good investment by doing something thorough and doing it right the first time. We hope that we give the building life that would last 30, 50 more years in a building that has stood the test of time. A comparison building could be Lockport City Hall, which is a much older school building, a renovated school building than Central. So there isn't a plan to close Central, but I would offer right now Central is temporarily closed, and it's caused quite a bit of disruption in the lives of students, the lives of our community. As Mrs. Croy said, a loss that we likely will have to realize as a district because insurance, both of us feel, won't cover it.
Next question?
There's a question about if the referendum passes, how is the district letting the taxpayers know that the increase will be in addition to the how we raise taxes on an annual basis is kind of what she's trying to say. How are we letting taxpayers know that I don't know how to phrase it in a better way, there'll be an addition to annual increase in their taxes?
So, the tax calculator is actually, that's what it's doing. So the tax calculator on our website that Mrs. Wheeler pointed to shows what the increase is that is strictly due to the bond referendum. It's specifically talking about the portion of the bill that would relate only to that purpose. Annually in December, the board approves the operating tax levy, and that increase is reflected on the tax bill that we were showing earlier. So on the tax bill we were showing earlier, you could see from year to year how the tax rate itself has gone down and the operating amount has actually changed there, right? So what'll happen with that rate is the rate's going to go up as a result of this bond referendum. So I think that we're attempting to tell taxpayers now that the increase that is showing up in the tax calculator is due strictly to the bonds. And then come next December, we'll be asking the board to approve the next property tax operating levy. And then the two pieces combined, I always report those pieces in total as well, so the board sees the taxes come in. So it'll be shown and combined in the December as well, in the next December meeting when the board approves the levy.
But and just to clarify, this is a calculator that's produced by a third-party financial firm that has done this for other schools. This is not unique to Lockport.
Correct.
And additionally, the efforts of our public relations department, this event this evening, community forums, presentations, making ourselves available at Central Campus every Wednesday at 6:30. We want to make sure that you know as community members about the Central referendum, but we also have an obligation that as many community members wake up on March 20th knowing that this was on the line, whether they're for it, whether they're against it. We just have to make a full-throated effort to point to the resources, much like Janine Wheeler did, and Mrs. Croy is doing right now, to let you know how you can get more information and where you can find out that information for yourself and personalize what this means for you. So that's part of the information duty that we have from board meetings to regular communications to keep you informed.
Next question.
So we have an online person who's posed a
fund balances, which you've already started talking about, and kind of school financial cycles. So I'm gonna try and consolidate these. But one is, if you looked at your cash flow and balances, we have $30 million that could be utilized, and we could still hit our June 30th target of 6 months cash on hand. So I don't know if you want to start with that one, and then I can ask a follow-up.
Okay, so that's a complicated question because, as I said earlier, the total that we may have, so the total fund balance we have, while it says 10 months cash, 10 total months cash on hand as of January 31st, 2024, that total can't be spent on buildings, right? So that total has to be spent on education, operations and maintenance, regular operations and maintenance, meaning paying the salaries, cleaning the floors, etc., transportation, paying the drivers, and paying for the service of the buses, etc. Like, we don't have a chunk of money here that we could spend for this purpose.
Right, and furthermore, so I think the only fund that you're looking at that would be large enough to remove from it, the questioner's question, $30 million would be the education fund. One, we would legally not be using that money as we advertised in our budget, in our levy, in the way that we told taxpayers we were going to use that. And so it's restricted. But also, if we removed $30 million from the education fund, it once again, changing a fund like that requires all sorts of legal work and truth in budgeting and levying. It's the only fund, and that fund is restricted for a very good reason. It funds the human beings that are working with children every single day and everything that goes behind their education. We're fundamentally in a people business. If you remove $30 million from that fund balance, you would default on the obligation you have to finance and pay the actual people who are working with the children in our community.
I think the follow-up to that question, and he is going back and responding, because I said, you responded to another question he asked, and he's asking the question about where you said the district would issue the bonds if the referendum passes all at one time. Again, you talked about how in this high interest time, like construction costs could be more, ensuring that you could finish it. He asked, with that extra money, would taxpayers ever get money back?
So the answer is it's a possibility, but not probable, right? So normally there are restrictions to what you can use that interest for, right? And the intent is usually any money you make on bond revenue is used right back into the project, right? There's always a possibility for future reductions in tax levy. Just like this past December, the board did pass resolutions to basically say we're not going to ask you, taxpayer, for the bond and interest levy amount. We're going to pay it out of other funds, right? So we could do that, and that's a way to give some money back to taxpayers. So that there's always, every year, the board has that opportunity if there are funds available for that.
And presently, last December, our board abated back, because our bond and interest right now is at such a low point, they could abate that back to taxpayers, which amounts to a discount on the operating levy, roughly about $40 per person. But obviously, that's an average. It depends on your home and your particular situation in this 65 square mile area. That has to happen annually, and it's a conversation that the board has set out on in most of our financial projections in our 5-year plan, have that idea of abatement on the operations budget side of things built into it.
The next question we have is, what has been the cost of the district to send students to Legal Way North?
That's a great question. I actually remember to bring that. So the initial lease agreement with Lincoln Way set our lease payment at an amount that actually turned out to be too high. So what happened was there was an estimated amount of what it might cost to run that building once it was started back up, and also including the initial cleaning cost, right? It was a building that was closed, so it needed to be cleaned, it needed to be prepared for occupancy. So the initial lease payment of $250,000 a month was for 3 months, and that included those pieces. Then what happened at that point was there was an analysis done by myself and Mr. Duback, my counterpart over there, the CSBO over there at Lincoln Way, District 210. We looked at all the actual expenses for the 3-month period of all the utilities and how the upfront cleaning bill came in, the actual amount. And that ended up with a credit back to the district. So the $250,000 a month was too high, right? So that caused us to lower that amount. All that being said, for the total amount from November to May that we're expecting to be in Lincoln Way North building, it's gonna cost us about $1 million. It's a little bit over $1 million for that rental.
Thank you. There was a question about general classrooms and room sizes at Central Campus. And one of our constituents asked, is it true that there's only 4 general classrooms at Central that are smaller than 500 feet? And is there truth to 60% of the classrooms being larger than 500, even up to 800 square feet?
We have classrooms that vary from 500 square feet. Some are as small as that. I would probably guess, I don't have that schematic in front of me, that's about maybe 4 or 5, up to 600 square feet, 800 square feet, 1,000 square feet. The question with those is what happens in those classrooms. We align that to a master schedule. What happens in an English classroom might be entirely different than what happens in a biology classroom or an art classroom or a physical education classroom. This renovation is really about making sure that every classroom has the appropriate amount of space for its intended purpose, first and foremost. Second, that if it's, for example, a biology classroom, that it is a fully functional biology classroom, a classroom that has electricity coming from down, from above, rather than on the floor, which can be a trip hazard and an ADA issue. Also, that lab tables are appropriate for the amount of learners in the room, so that all of those spaces fit what the actual need is. In some cases, we have 2 programs, the CCC and Lockport Academy, that are for learners with special needs, that are right now in very small spaces given the size of their program. And recreating appropriate spaces, because we believe those students should stay in our community and have had a lot of success with those students. But they should be in appropriate spaces where there's enough square footage for them to do the life skills and the work that they need to do as learners. So it varies across the entire building. The focus really is reclaiming space that we're currently not using, modernizing space that we are using to be a 2023, 2024, 2025 and beyond education.
So there's been a couple of conversations about why the ceilings fell. We hear it often. I'm wondering if you can share, I think that there's a lot of misinformation about what happened, and maybe you guys could share and reiterate where people can find like the maintenance reports on how the ceiling, the building was kept, and the WJ report showing why, kind of why the ceiling fell. I think people are understanding that or thinking that it's lack of maintenance when that wasn't what we had found. So if there's a way that we can where that information, they can find that.
Right. The first place that I would start is with our board agenda from February 20th. There's an executive summary from WJE. I would take a look at that. Very easy, very accessible. Then I think a number of people mentioned, I would go back, and even though it's very technical, and it is somewhat long, their presentation from 2 forensic architects who are also structural engineers begins about an hour into our last board meeting. That is archived on our YouTube site. Their PowerPoint presentation and their final about 152-page report will be available, will be online. And you can find all of those things from the 2020 structural assessment that was done moving forward. All of that, if you go to our website, there's a tab that says Central Campus Updates, and you'll be able to see all of those reports. Just to re-summarize or recapitulate, in the end, those forensic architects and structural engineers entered 379 ceilings in 379 rooms, spaces, offices. They found a variety of different types of ceilings, coded most of the building in green, meaning low to no risk, but they did find ceilings, especially in the 1920s section of the building, that concerned them. They were similar ceiling construction methods as was used in room 310. And out of an abundance of caution, we believe that those ceiling systems need to be removed. So why did they fail? Well, WJE shared that first off, there were no signs beforehand. There was no buckling, there was no water, there was no flooding, there was no cracking, there was no falling of any kind. In their forensic work, they checked the roof, the weather conditions. Was there any leaking in the roof that could have got down onto the plaster? There wasn't. It was dry up there. They concluded that over time, those nails that were holding that plaster up began to slip from natural aging. They also, that was accelerated, as I said earlier, by moisture created by condensation in a building that doesn't have modern climate control. I would review that for yourself. It can be a little bit tedious. You might find out a little bit about the difference between southern pine and Douglas fir, and see samples of nails and cartoons that show mathematic calculations, but I think it gives you a really good idea of what happened at Central and what can happen when major systems fail without warning.
Our next question is, if the referendum passes, how compliant will Central Campus now be with the American with Disability Act?
So my understanding is that once you start a major renovation project with a building, you now need to bring things up to the current codes for the school district. So my understanding is that is a big portion of the piece of the plan for Central Campus. So percentage of compliance?
We have to be as compliant as people like the Will County Regional Office of Education that governs us, building codes that we have to fit in. Those are oftentimes, and we budgeted in this referendum proposal for that. We have to follow those codes based on the renovation that we do. And many of those things sometimes are hidden. They have to do with flooring elements. They have to do with widths of doors. They have to do with furniture in the room so that someone who might be non-ambulatory or have some disabilities can move freely about the room in an unencumbered way. It has to do with elevators. It has to do with bathrooms. Not all of our bathrooms at Central are fully compliant with the Americans with Disability Act. They all would have to be fully compliant. The Americans with Disability Act really calls on structures to be accessible. There are some parts of that vintage building that we would have to create greater access. For example, along Jefferson Street, we have with our architects, the only way that we could be fully accessible with no supports or no help coming into the Jefferson main entrance is to completely demolish that entrance and rebuild it. That really isn't the intent of the Americans with Disability Act. To give greater access to all of our students, we would propose a more working entrance on 13th Street at door 15. It's a more secure area too. We'd like all of our students to come into a vestibule every morning, visitors to come in there so that it's more secure. We can put people in a better security situation, and it's proximate to the elevator. So those are some of the types of things that we would have to work around, but in that case, we're proposing not demolishing the front entrance, creating a better entrance really for every student.
This will be our last question. With some new subdivisions that are being developed in Lockport, will that development, will new homeowners in Lockport, will that soften the property taxes for current homeowners in District 205?
In theory, yes, that would happen. So what happens when new property is added to what we call the tax rolls, right? So when new subdivisions come into place, there's a number of new homeowners with new values on these homes, and they will be paying a portion of what the district requests from the taxpayers, the tax levy. What happens then is what the district's asking for is spread over more taxpayers, more homeowners, more businesses, and because we're asking an amount over more people, right, from more people, then each person pays a tiny little bit less, right? So the answer is yes, it's just a matter of how much, right? It depends on how many new homes, how much the value of those homes are, how many new businesses, that kind of thing. You know, for example, we have a car dealership that is in the process over here on 9th?
159th Street.
159th Street. Once that entity, once that business is complete, that business will start paying property taxes, right? And that business will take a share of the tax burden off of all of the other residents.
It is unfortunately 8:02. So we really hope that you think spending an hour with us was worthwhile. And we certainly hope within the scope of that hour, we answered as many questions as possible. Right now, all of those questions on the chat in YouTube, we can archive all those questions. We can use them to do a better job to answer your questions about making sense of all of these dollars and what it means. Some things I would encourage you to do, first and foremost, all the resources that we mentioned, I would encourage you to go to those spaces and places, especially online, because I think my humble opinion is we're the most transparent school district I've worked in, certainly in 36 years, but certainly I believe in the area. I think a lot of that is due to our public relations and to our Director of Business Services. So I would do that. Also, continue your conversations. I think one of the most important things in a phase like this is sitting down with folks. Sometimes these items are so complex, so related to visuals, they're hard to understand unless you sit down with folks and have a conversation. We always welcome that. Our emails, our phone lines, our doors, our offices are open to you. If you reach out and need to meet with one of us and maybe some school board members to really talk through these things, we will absolutely do that. And then the final thing is I think our school board meetings are a source of information for you. If you can't make an in-person meeting, we're always online, just like we are now, and all of those materials are available for you. Once again, on behalf of the Board of Education, thank you so much for sitting in tonight on making sense of the dollars, the Lockport Township High School District 205 Central Referendum. Have a wonderful night, and I hope you had a wonderful hour. Thank you so much.